most gifted, flamboyant and popular players ever to have graced a football pitch. Baxter was also much more than that, an iconic figure in Scotland, and in the swinging 60s he was seen as Scotland's first pop star football player.
You've got to put him as possibly one of, if not the greatest player that the Rangers ever had, or Scotland for that matter.
Used to go and watch him all the time and used to marvel at his balance and his confidence and ability. I remember one particular game against Borussia Mönchengladbach, and they beat them there on the 8-0. It was a pood of a pitch, and Jim had his rubber studs on, and you could have set the performance and music.
You'd have to say Dennis Law was a fantastic player and Kenny Dalglish, but Jimmy's up there. If not the best, he's in that top three anyway.
Definitely one of the best. I mean, if I was picking a Scottish team, he would be one of the first names on the sheet.
Jim Baxter could play in any team at any time.
He encapsulated the Scottish football player at that time, you know, that the fact that he was a wonderful talent and therefore people allowed him to be arrogant. In Scotland, if you're arrogant without talent, they're down your throat, but Baxter was allowed that facility purely because he had exceptional talent.
Baxter's journey to fame from the pitch to the football field saw him walk in the footsteps of such men as Steen, Busby and Shankly. Crossgate's Primrose was his junior team. From there it was on to Raith Rovers, and in June 1960 the 20-year-old Baxter signed for Rangers for the sum of £17,500.
Baxter again, he returns it to the left winger. Baxter. As far as I can see, there's no special ploy at the moment to stop Baxter. There is, it isn't succeeding.
Few could equal Baxter on the football field. Too many. He was the most naturally gifted player this country has ever produced. Yet he was more than just a player. He was a showman, and his greatest stage was Wembley. The defining moment might have been 1967, but Baxter's first experience of the stadium came in 1963.
It was the first time I'd seen the stadium, and the park was just like a bowling green. It really was. I said, this is my stage.
Eric went off after 6 minutes, no substitutes, and we played England for 84 minutes and beat them 2-1. Jim scored both goals.
Henderson gets it across. St John, nobody there. Almost a chance for Baxter.
And the goal he scored was a good example of his outlook and his thought, his understanding of the game.
But he does get possession, it could still be dangerous.
And he came in from the inside left position. Gordon Banks was a world-class goalkeeper, and Jim was aware that goalkeepers at that level, they come to the near post, but they prepare to go to the far post because the player usually shoots for the far post. Jim was aware of this, that Banks would go in that direction, and he knocked the ball in at the near post. That was his understanding of football, and he was a genius in that game.
Baxter for Scotland. Where's the goal? Henderson coming through. Hudson field inside the box. Down he comes, the penalty. Penalty to Scotland.
I was brought down in the penalty box, and we were wondering who was going to take the penalty kick, and Jim nonchalantly walked up and placed the ball in the penalty spot.
When the penalty came up, who else could you give it to but Jim Baxter? And I said, just handed it to him. Jim, stick it away.
And I remember the utter conviction and composure with which he walked up to the penalty spot. Hadn't taken a penalty in senior football in his life before. I don't think any of us knew that at the time. And scored with what would be a how to take a penalty kick. You know, if you're doing an illustrated history of the game, you would use Baxter.
Mackay says to Baxter, it's up to you, Jim. And here comes Baxter to make it 2-0 for Scotland, we hope. Chance of a lifetime for Jim Baxter. Here he comes. It's there!
Believe it or not, that was the first penalty I'd ever taken, and certainly in any form of football. So it showed, I think, not a bad bit of bottle that. I honestly didn't know that, but it wouldn't have mattered anyway. To me, He was already scored the first goal, such a cocky lad. I know that he wouldn't miss it anyway. And maybe somebody else in the team might, like myself.
I remember one of the English players saying to him, I think the ball's in a bit of a hole, Jim. So Jim just never bothered with him. And after they put the ball in the back of the net, Jimmy says to him, it's in a bigger hole now.
The same character off the field as it was on the field. I mean, as he said at Wembley, he says he was going to put one past his own goalkeeper to score a hat-trick. Now, and our player says that, and he was serious about it. You know, he was going to score a goal against an own goal so he could get a hat-trick, say he scored a hat-trick at Wembley. That shows you what like the character was.
1967, of course, is the stuff of legend, the high watermark of Scottish international football history. Flamboyance, arrogance, style, defiance, and of course victory over the reigning world champions. Baxter was centre stage.
Our nearest and dearest neighbours had just won the World Cup. They were world champions and we were playing them. At that time we had the edge in England because I think at that time we still had won more internationals against England than they'd won against us. And so here was our chance to have our own petty, little localised revenge.
World champions, and there was Scotland, I think they were 41. It was a marvellous game. It really was. I enjoyed every minute.
This is number 6, Jim Baxter.
Tommy Gemmell for Scotland. Moore gets his head in the way and Gemmell has it again. Oh, and a chance here! Baxter now for Scotland, slowing the game down.
Well, there's a song somewhere that says you've either got or you haven't got style. And Baxter had style. And I think not only were we winning at Wembley, we can still do that. We did it a couple of years ago. But I think we were winning with a certain amount of panache and flair. And there was something about the way that Baxter always had time and always had room. He would dwell on the ball and you think he's going to lose it, he's going to get it nicked from him. But he didn't. And in a strange way, this tremendous, almost comatose, so laid back as to be almost comatose at times, this communicated itself to the people around him, his teammates, and they thought, oh, well, if he's flourishing here, I don't see any reason why we can't. And in that sense, he was a great encourager, not in the driving the fist into the palm of the hand sense, but in the look, it's quite easy.
Scotland slowing it down. Taking the mickey out of this England side.
If you actually see that game, and you watch there a clip there of Alan Ball, and he's running between, they're playing passy between Jim Dennis and I think Tommy Gemmell, and he's running, he's trying to kick man at him, and apparently before, in the tunnel, wee Billy Brendan, God rest him, Billy come up to me and says, Stanley, listen, he says, get close to Bolly, he says, you know who that wee high squeaky voice, he says, and get hold of him, he says, and say to him, he says, is Jimmy Clitheroe your father? Be true, Stanley wanders up to him 5 minutes so the game's away and he goes out to him and he says, is it true that Jimmy Clitheroe's your daddy? Off his head.
People keep asking me why Alan Ball wanted to kick me. He says, he ran after you all the game trying to kick you. I says, he's not got any sense of humour. I says, I called him Jimmy Clitheroe and he took the spar. Do you remember that wee guy with the wee short trousers and all that? He's got a wee squeaky voice.
Lennox, number 11. Jim McCalliog.
Always had a bit of mischief about him, even mischief on the park. He had that where he could always like to, rather than score goals, he would want to take the mickey.
I can see the photographs and the images of him playing keepy up against England at Wembley. I mean, it's burnt forever in my imagination. I mean, it's just literally one of the kind of great cultural tattoos of Scotland. You can just see it now as he's playing with that ball.
He wanted to be in England, naturally. He wanted to win. But my first and foremost thoughts on a football field was always to entertain. I always wanted to please the punters and give them something to shout about. Something different. They don't have that now. The fans were so happy that I mean, it was unbelievable. Dennis was looking to get 9 goals and says, I settled for extracting the urine.
Oh yes, the suit looks very well. Offset perfectly by the shirt. And that tie. Very Sir.
Rather than simply sell everyone our own mortgages, investments or insurance, we now scour thousands of products from hundreds of different providers so our advisors can recommend what's best for you.
Yes, yes, yes!
No. The Marketplace at Bradford and Bingley. What's best for you, not us. Also available at Slater, Hogg and Howison.
Moburn's Easter Week sale is now on. This special offer range cookers just £395. Call Moburn on 0800 413 413.
Jim Baxter was a man ahead of his time, with a rebellious streak that marked him out from his fellow professionals. In an era when the manager's word was law, Baxter was a law unto himself.
I've often thought of Jim Baxter as a mod, you know, in lots of ways. If you actually go back to the early 60s when he emerged, he was extremely stylishly dressed. He had the kind of mohair suits, pork pie hats. He was quite a glamorous looking guy. He had the early sort of mod Beatle haircut. He was someone who, in lots of ways, also took on board this idea that the working class of Scotland at that time could be upwardly mobile, you know. So although he was from, you know, Hillabeath and he was from a mining community in Fife, the truth of the matter is, as soon as he moved to Glasgow and signed for Rangers, he was hanging about trendy hotel bars in St Enoch Square, going to nightclubs, going to the best tailors in town, and actually wearing his money on his sleeve. And he's a very, very flamboyant character. And in lots of ways, he was someone who I think really, really captured the era of the 60s. In lots of ways, he was the closest we actually had to the Beatles. It was Jim Baxter.
He was an unbelievable character. I mean, he took football like as if a working man was going down the pit to work, he'd come up. He never bothered much about training. He didn't really. He took the mickey out of managers, trainers. You know, he used to come in with big, like, cushions up his stomach, as he says, boss, I'm losing weight now, a great big stomach and things like this. But you never knew what he was up to, you know. He'd nail your sort of shoes to the floor when you're out training and things like that. But what a character, unbelievable.
He treated everybody the same, whether you're a millionaire or he's just an ordinary guy in the street. And I think that's how so many people relate to him. Everybody has got their heroes. Everybody would like to have played on a big stage at football. And probably the person who would like to have been would be Jimmy Baxter, because, as I say, he had that great arrogance on the park, but off it, he was basically was a very humble man.
He enjoyed everything. He loved playing football. He loved having a drink. He loved having a good laugh with the boys. So that's the way he was, and that's the way he was in life. His football just carried on after it.
There's a school of thought that says great players would have been great anywhere, any time, and I think that's probably true enough. What you couldn't do now, I think, is lead the kind of lifestyle that Jim Baxter did lead and hope to make even 5 years at the top, even 7 or 8 years. I wouldn't say the game is necessarily better than it was 20 years ago. In some aspects it is, but it's most certainly faster. There's no question it's faster.
It always has to be answered repeatedly. Could these players have played in the modern day? And of course they could, because the ability was always there. And they would always have found the pace, and the timing of Jim Baxter would have meant he'd been a great player in any era.
His showmanship wasn't confined to the football field. Baxter's larger-than-life personality demonstrated itself both on and off the pitch.
Baxter. Miller.
Jim and I was the first Glasgow Rangers players to be chosen for the rest of Europe by Sir Stanley Matthews to play alongside such footballing giants as Puskas and Di Stefano, and it was a tremendous honour. And when I look back on it, I was really, really keyed up for this game. And I remember the night we were going to get the team bus, and I was really nervous, and Jim says, Willie, just you run on ahead and get the seats on the bus, because I've got to wait here and sign my autograph for Puskas and Di Stefano. Imagine that in a game like that.
Everybody seemed to wanted to be in his company because he was good company to be in. And the stories, I mean, no, there's thousands of them. As we've all said, there's ones that you can't tell, ones you can. I mean, he took Puskas up to Easter House one time to a party. All Puskas could say it was Jimmy Baxter and whiskey. That's one that, you could just take what you want about the rest of it. But that's the kind of people that wanted to go about with him.
We were down at a Daily Mirror internet vote for the best player of all time. Pelé was #1 and George Best was #2. I don't think I figured in the rankings, but anyway, I was charged with the responsibility of taking Jim down. And this wonderful cameo moment in a bar at Terry Neal's bar in London, when George Best was looking slightly bedraggled after a night in the bevy. And Jim said to George Best, "By the way, George, you want to watch that bevy, you'll end up like me."
It's a natural talent. He wasted some of it because he didn't work hard enough at his training and things like that. But he's like Jim Baxter, Georgie Best, they're brilliant players, the best players in the country. But they abused it a little bit.
Best part about Jim was he was really a Hib supporter, before he went senior. So he was a very clever lad as well.
Well, I remember him go downstairs here in the stadium at the front door in the little room, giving this guy a rollicking on the phone back in the early 60s. And when he came out, I said, "You didn't have to play onto that guy." I said, "Who was that?" He says, "It was my sergeant," because he was still doing his national service. And he was stationed at Stirling Castle. And this was his sergeant, and he more or less told the sergeant, I'll be back when I feel like it, no, when you tell me."
I remember sitting at his testimonial dinner, and his 1967 Wembley jersey went for £17,500. And I said to Jim, "You must be chuffed with that." He goes, "Hey, you ken, big fella, I've got another 6 of them in the wardrobe." And of course I was falling about at the top table laughing, but that's the type of guy he was. But I'm assured that you can tell that person he got the original jersey.
I think we now live in an era that is becoming increasingly politically correct, and people are being lectured all the time about their health, about how they should live their lives, about decorum in public and all of those things. And you just kind of feel, Jim Baxter actually maybe had it more right. He wanted to live a full, rich, complicated, daft, interesting, fascinating and loving life. And if that meant getting bevied, is that the end of the world? Come on, give us a break.
As much as anything else, Jim Baxter represented an idea of Scottishness. With his flamboyance and disregard for authority, he connected more than any player with the common man.
One of the things that people are identifying with Jim Baxter is the idea that he's human, profoundly human, with all the flaws that we've all got. He drank too much, he got into trouble, he said things he wished he hadn't said, he made rash decisions in his life, he didn't always turn up for work on time. All of the things that all of us as human beings do, day in, day out. And I think that people actually, for their superstars, Scots somehow also want them to have a wee flaw of humanity, the trait of ordinariness in them. And here was, classically, an ordinary man with extraordinary skills.
Just an ordinary working guy who never changed, and he had no sort of religious bigotries or anything like that. I mean, he'd speak to anybody, he'd buy a drink for anyone, he'd get a drink back. I think that was part of the problem. But there again, that was his character.
Baxter's funeral took place at Glasgow Cathedral on Friday, when the brightest stars in the football firmament turned out to pay tribute. Among the speakers was Baxter's good friend, the author William McIlvanney.
To know no fear doesn't mean courage. Courage lies in what you do with your fear, the style you give it. And style was always Jim Baxter's forte. It flowered most conspicuously in the player, but it had its roots in the man. That's why when we celebrate the one, we should celebrate the other. The dismissive confidence of the player grew out of the nature of Jim Baxter. You couldn't have one without the other. Mousy spirits don't take Wembley by storm. Sometimes the manifestations of that nature disconcerted people socially. But if you took the trouble to know him, you found a surprisingly modest, and I mean that, a man modest about his own talents, surprisingly modest, down-to-earth, and honest man. He remarked to me once that he had offended a right lot of people on the way. I hope they bear no grudges now. If they do, I would say this. As far as I'm concerned, if you didn't like Jim Baxter, it was just that you didn't know him well enough. He'll do for me. He lived on his own terms, and the biggest risks he took were with himself. I think that's not a bad epitaph.
Indeed, he will live long in Scotland's memory.
Almost every person who was a fan of Scottish football felt that that was significant that Jim Baxter had died, that even the vast majority of people who'd never ever seen him played, who actually weren't even born in 1967, still knew that he meant something. And that's something that a lot of the players that are playing for today's Scotland team will probably never achieve in their life, whether they get 50, 70, 100 caps, is that he is a national hero.
I think he'll be remembered as one of the greatest Rangers and Scotland players ever. And hopefully we'll see the like of his again, but it's highly unlikely.
And the privilege of playing with him at Rangers in his latter days, and I found him a really intelligent man in the game. And then later in years, we had pubs opposite each other. He used to come in and talk tactics to me. I enjoyed that. But it's very sad news because he is, without doubt, the greatest Rangers player ever.
No, I don't think you can see that type of player now in Scotland, unfortunately. I don't know why, it's just that God doesn't put too many of them on this earth, I don't think, you know.
And the only thing I can say about Jim Baxter is he's one of, there'll be no more like him. He was a character for by being a great footballer. He was a great man and a great character.
Inside him, he was a fierce competitor. A lot of people didn't know that. But I'll always remember him for basically just give me the ball and I'll make it talk.
I never saw him down. He was always, hi Davey, how you going? And as soon as you meet him, I was at his house 3 weeks ago after he had been sent home because he wasn't going to be operated on. And I went in with Willie Henderson and that. We had the most fantastic 3 hours that I will never ever forget. Laughing, joking, all about what we done and used to do. It was great.
If there's a world of living in heaven, Jimmy will be an automatic choice because he was simply the best.
I think they're so lucky that I was a football player, because if I wouldn't have been, probably I would never have got to know Jim Baxter and to be a friend. And another thing I might say to you as well is we're talking up on the road and he says, hold on a minute. And he went over, we're up in his house, and he went over to under his television and he took my video. He's got my video. He says, wee man, he says, that is brilliant. He says, every time I'm feeling a wee bit low, or I've had a few swallows, he says, I come up and I put that on, he says, it's brilliant. So that was a guy, and that was another thing about him, that's how great he was, because that big divide that we've got with the religious bigotry, he crossed that ages ago, because when he came from Hullabeath down to Glasgow, he was just a boy for the sticks kind of thing, and he ended up going about with Billy McNeil, Mick Jackson, Big John Coltrane, Bongo Harley. They were all his pals, and that never ever come into it. But remembering Jim Baxter, you know, we had a great bit of sadness because we had a lot of smashing times together, and he was just a lovely, lovely guy.
Another young man safely strung his silver string guitar, and he played to people everywhere. Some say he was a star, but he was just a country boy. His simple songs confess, and the music he had in him, so very few possess. In my hour of darkness, in my time of need, oh Lord, grant me vision, oh Lord, grant me speed.
Baxter for Scotland. Where's the goal?
Taking the mickey out of this England side.